She cleaned the floor in silence but carried the world in her words. No one ever asked, no one ever noticed, until that day. What started with a simple "excuse me" turned into a historic twist, and when the truth came out, no one in the building could look away. Before you hear this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of recognition, courage, and transformation. The lobby was bustling with hurried executives, their footsteps echoing on the polished marble, a frantic rhythm that seemed to dictate the very pulse of that glass and steel skyscraper. It was the financial heart of the city, a place where power and ambition met in every handshake, in every calculated glance. However, for Sarah Johnson, the woman who dedicated her nights to restoring the shine to that same marble, the rhythm was different. It was the gentle rhythm of the mop, the sound of water in the bucket, the silent cadence of someone who moves in the shadows while the corporate world sleeps. On that particular morning, the frantic rhythm was broken. Sarah was kneeling near the main entrance, focused on a persistent stain, when a group of Russian visitors, clearly lost and agitated, stopped a few feet away from her, gesturing and speaking loudly in their native language. The security guards and receptionists seemed unable to comprehend the torrent of words. Sarah, without raising her eyes from the floor, heard the frustration in the men's voices. Something inside her stirred. She finished cleaning the stain, stood up with the calmness of someone who is not in a hurry, and approached the group. "Dobry dzień, вам нужна помощь?" "Good morning, do you need help?" she asked, her voice soft but perfectly articulated in impeccable Russian. The Russian executives stopped, surprised. One of them, a corpulent man in a dark suit, frowned. "Вы говорите по-русски?" "You speak Russian?" he asked, disbelief etched on his face. Sarah smiled slightly. "Yes, a little." "What can I do for you?" They explained that they had an important meeting and couldn't find the room. Sarah gave clear and concise directions in Russian, pointing the way. As she spoke, another group of visitors, this time Germans, approached, also looking confused. Sarah, without hesitation, switched to German, explaining the situation to the Russians and then offering help to the newcomers. Shortly after, an American executive joined the confusion, and Sarah, with the same naturalness, began speaking English, mediating communication between the three groups with impressive ease. The CEO of the company, Dr. Robert Williams, was on his way to his office, absorbed in thoughts about the crucial meeting he would have that day with foreign investors. He had passed through the lobby hundreds of times, but had never really seen the people who kept it immaculate. At that moment, however, something made him stop, an unusual commotion near the entrance, and at its center, his cleaning staff employee, the discreet lady he occasionally saw in the corridors late at night, conversing fluently in 3 different languages. Dr. Williams approached, curiosity overcoming the urgency of his appointments. He heard Sarah alternating between Russian, German, and English with a precision that left him astonished. It wasn't just the fluency, it was the nuance, the ability to capture the tone and intention behind the words. When the visitors finally went their ways, visibly relieved and grateful, Dr. Williams approached Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't know your name," he said, feeling strangely embarrassed. "Sarah Johnson, sir, Sarah Johnson," she replied with the same calmness she had used with the foreign executives, although there was a slight blush on her cheeks. "Sarah, I didn't know you spoke languages," said Dr. Williams, still processing what he had just witnessed. "I learned over the years, sir," she replied, looking away at the bucket and mop as if she wanted to return to her usual task, to her invisible place. Dr. Williams felt uncomfortable. Years. How long had she worked there? How much talent was hidden under that simple uniform? "Sarah, would you mind coming to my office for a moment? I'd like to talk with you." She hesitated for a moment, surprised. An invitation from a CEO to his office wasn't something that happened to a cleaning lady, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll just put my things away." Minutes later, Sarah was sitting in one of the leather chairs in Dr. Williams's imposing office. The view of the city below was spectacular, a stark contrast to the humble streets where she lived. Dr. Williams looked at her with a mixture of fascination and perplexity. "Sarah, what I saw down there was extraordinary. "How many languages do you speak?" he asked. She took a deep breath. It was rare for someone to show genuine interest. "9, sir. Russian, German, English, French, Spanish, Italian, Mandarin, Japanese, and Arabic." Dr. Williams blinked. 9. And she was the woman who cleaned the bathrooms and hallways of his company. How did you learn all that? And why are you working in cleaning with that skill?" Sarah felt a knot in her throat. The story was long and painful, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to tell it. "I come from a humble family, sir. My parents were rural workers. They always encouraged me to study. I got a scholarship to university, studied languages, and was doing a master's degree in applied linguistics, focusing on simultaneous translation." She paused, her eyes watery. "But my mother became seriously ill. She needed constant, expensive care. The scholarship wasn't enough, and the master's required full-time dedication. I had to drop out. Then my father passed away, and shortly after I discovered I was pregnant with my daughter, Sophie." Her voice faltered a bit. "I was alone, without a master's degree, without formal professional experience in my field. I needed a job that would allow me to take care of Sophie and at the same time have flexibility. The night shift in cleaning was the only option I found that guaranteed me a fixed salary and allowed me to be with her during the day. It was enough to put food on the table and keep the electricity and water bills paid. It was what I could do." Dr. Williams listened, the initial surprise giving way to deep empathy. He had never stopped to think about the lives of the people who worked the night shifts, the faces he saw only in passing. "But I never stopped studying, sir," continued Sarah, her voice gaining firmness. "I used my free time, the breaks, the early mornings. I bought used books, picked up old newspapers from the trash, listened to foreign radio stations on the internet. It was what kept me sane, what reminded me that I was more than just the cleaning lady. It was what gave me hope. Nobody ever asked about my qualifications. Nobody ever noticed my skills. Until today." Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. There she was, right in front of him, an extraordinary talent, hidden in plain sight. A woman with an intercultural communication capacity that his company, with its growing global operations, desperately needed. He felt a twinge of shame for his own blindness. How many other people like Sarah were there, invisible, underutilized? "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, I'm sorry that you've gone through so many difficulties, and I'm sorry that we, as a company, haven't noticed your potential before." He paused. "We have an important meeting today with executives from several countries. Our official translators are unavailable. Would you feel comfortable helping us? It would be simultaneous translation, in real time." Sarah's heart raced. Simultaneous translation. It was what she had dreamed of doing, what she had studied for, what she had practiced in silence for years. But the responsibility was immense, and the fear of failing, of not being up to the task, was paralyzing. I don't know, sir. It's been a long time since I've done this in a professional environment. And I don't have the degree." "Sarah, in that lobby, you didn't need a degree to communicate. You needed skill, knowledge, and empathy. And you demonstrated having all of that in abundance," said Dr. Williams, his voice firm, conveying confidence. "I trust you. Do you accept the challenge?" She looked at him at the sincerity in his eyes. This man, the CEO, was giving her a chance, a real chance to show who she really was. The fear was still there, but hope was greater. "Yes, sir, I accept." The news that the cleaning lady would be the translator at the high-level meeting spread through the company like wildfire. The hallways buzzed with whispers, surprise, skepticism, curiosity. The main meeting room, usually a stage for inflated egos and tense negotiations, became an improvised theater for Sarah's unexpected performance. When she entered the room, wearing one of the suits that Dr. Williams had hastily provided, bit loose but elegant, there was a momentary silence. The executives, some of whom saw her daily cleaning their offices, observed her with varied looks, some curious, others clearly disdainful. Among them was Dr. Helen Crawford, Director of International Relations, a woman known for her cold competence and her contempt for anything that didn't fit her rigid standards. She looked at Sarah with an expression of pure displeasure. The meeting began. Languages, mixed, English, Spanish, French, German. Sarah sat at the table, focused. At first there was a slight hesitation, a deeper breath before she began to speak. But then something changed. It was as if she entered a flow, connecting words, ideas, intentions. Her translation wasn't just literal. She captured cultural nuances, subtle jokes, unspoken concerns. She undid misunderstandings with lightness, smoothed tensions with a well-placed word, and facilitated communication in a way that the company's professional translators rarely managed. The foreign executives, initially cautious, began to relax. They felt they were being truly understood. Dr. Williams watched, amazed. He hadn't just discovered a translator, he had discovered a cultural mediator, someone capable of building bridges where before there were walls. At the end of the meeting there was applause, not just from the visitors, but from some of the executives of the company itself, those who could see beyond the uniform and recognize genuine talent. Dr. Helen, however, remained impassive, her lips pressed into a thin line. The next day, Dr. Williams called Sarah to his office again. He was radiant. "Sarah, you were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You didn't just translate, you made the meeting happen, you connected people." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling of validation she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad I helped." "Helped? Sarah, you did much more than help. You showed that we have an invaluable resource here hidden. I want you to stop working in cleaning. I want to create a position for you, something that utilizes your skills, your life experience. I thought of something like cultural advisor for international affairs." Sarah was speechless. A position created for her. It was more than she had dared to dream, but the hesitation returned. "Sir, I don't have the degree. I don't have the formal academic training for such a position." "So what?" said Dr. Williams with a smile. "You have something much more valuable. Fluency in 9 languages, life experience that has given you a unique sensitivity, and a presence that calms and connects. What you demonstrated yesterday is worth more than any degree hanging on the wall. Do you accept the proposal, Sarah?" She looked at him, at the opportunity that was opening up before her. It was scary, uncertain, but it was real. It was the chance to give Sophie a better life, to prove to herself that all the sacrifices were not in vain. "Yes, sir, I accept." The news of her promotion exploded throughout the building. The cleaning lady promoted to executive. The reactions were polarized. Many applauded, seeing in her an example of overcoming and recognition of talent. Others criticized openly, or in venomous whispers. Unfair, favoritism. She doesn't have the profile. What does she know about the corporate world? Dr. Helen Crawford was one of the most vocal in her opposition, albeit in a veiled manner. In board meetings, she questioned the structure of the new position, the lack of precedent, the risk of putting someone without the proper training in such a strategic position. She saw Sarah not as a discovered talent, but as a threat to the established order, an anomaly that needed to be corrected. Sarah felt the weight of the stares, the comments, the resistance, but she remained firm. On her first day in the new position, she did something that surprised everyone. She asked to keep her old cleaning uniform, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder, to never forget where she came from and the struggles that brought her there. It was a constant reminder of her own resilience and the invisibility she hoped to help combat. She didn't just carry out the work of a cultural advisor, she began to transform the culture of the company. Her first task was to review old international contracts that were stalled because of linguistic and cultural barriers. With her precision and empathy, she identified the points of friction, proposed solutions that respected the nuances of each culture and, little by little, resumed agreements that seemed lost. She used her language skills to make everyone feel seen and understood, from international partners to colleagues within the company. She didn't show off, didn't make a fuss. She just did what needed to be done, with a quiet efficiency that disarmed even the most skeptical. When questioned by Dr. Helen in a tense meeting about her training and qualifications for the position, Sarah responded with results. She presented the contracts she had closed, the obstacles she had resolved, the bridges she had rebuilt. And then, looking Dr. Helen directly in the eyes, she said without trembling, "I don't need to be liked, Dr. Crawford. I just need to be useful. And the results show that I am." Dr. Helen didn't have an immediate response, but the look in her eyes promised that this wouldn't be the last time they faced off. Sarah's rise was just beginning, and with it, the resistance of those who felt threatened by her light. The path ahead would be long and full of challenges, but Sarah was ready to face them, one step at a time, just as she had learned one language at a time, in the darkness of night, dreaming of a future that now seemed finally within reach. But what she didn't know was that the shadows of the past and the intrigues of the present were about to intertwine in ways she could never have imagined, testing her strength and determination in ways that would go far beyond her linguistic abilities, and that would lead her to discover secrets that could change everything. Little by little, people from all departments of the company began to seek out Sarah. It wasn't just for her language skills, although that was undoubtedly a huge differential. It was also for her attentive listening, her wisdom, and her genuine way of including everyone in conversations, making them feel valued, regardless of their position or origin. Interns sought guidance on how to navigate the corporate environment. Colleagues asked for help in important decisions, not just related to international issues, but also on how to deal with internal conflicts or present ideas more effectively. Sarah's new role was not just a position created on the organizational chart. It became a symbol of a subtle but profound change in the company's culture. She spent her days in meetings, mediating complex negotiations with partners in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. She corrected old errors in contracts that could have cost the company millions, identifying ambiguous or culturally insensitive clauses that had gone unnoticed by lawyers and executives. Her ability to understand not just the words, but the cultural context and intentions behind them was an invaluable asset. One morning, an intern from the finance department, a young man named Peter, approached her in the corridor, visibly nervous. "Ms. Johnson, sorry to bother you, but I saw what you did in the meeting with the Russians. It was incredible. My mother, she also works in cleaning in another building. She speaks 5 languages, taught herself, reading, listening to music, but she's ashamed. She thinks no one would care." Sarah stopped, her heart tight from a young man's story. She remembered herself hiding her skills for so long. She looked at Peter, at the pain and shame in his eyes. "Peter, never be ashamed of where you come from, nor of your mother's talent. Shame is ignoring the brilliance of others. Tell her that what she does is extraordinary. That knowledge, no matter how it was acquired, is always valuable. And that she is not alone." Sarah's words resonated with Peter. He nodded with teary eyes and thanked her. That small encounter in the corridor was an example of the impact she was having one by one on the people around her. She wasn't just dealing with international business. She was touching lives, inspiring those who felt invisible to recognize their own worth. The idea of an internal program to value hidden talents began to take shape in her mind. A space to train, qualify, and give visibility to those who had always been in the shadows, just as she had been. She began to sketch the proposal in her notebooks, the same notebooks where she had once noted words and phrases in foreign languages. Now, they contained ideas for transforming the company, for creating an environment where talent could flourish, regardless of labels or positions. Dr. Robert Williams, now more attentive and receptive to the realities of his own company, noticed the positive impact that Sarah was generating. He saw the subtle change in the atmosphere, the growing collaboration between departments, the new energy that seemed to emanate from employees who before seemed to just fulfill their tasks. He knew there were others like Sarah, invisible but extraordinary, waiting for a chance. In a conversation in his office, Dr. Williams shared his vision with Sarah. "Sarah, what you've brought to this company goes far beyond your ability to translate. You've brought a new perspective, a humanity that we were losing. I want to create a program, an initiative to discover and develop these hidden talents you mentioned. Would you help me design this?" Sarah's response came quickly, with a sparkle in her eyes. "I've already started designing it, sir." A month later, the Inner Voice Initiative was born. It was an ambitious program, offering training, mentorship, development opportunities, and most importantly, a platform for employees at all levels to present their ideas and skills. Sarah was instrumental in its conception and implementation, working tirelessly to ensure that the program was accessible and effective. The impact was immediate. Maintenance staff with programming skills, receptionists with artistic talents, administrative assistants with strategic vision, all began to emerge from the shadows. Results emerged in unexpected areas, processes were optimized, team morale visibly improved, and most importantly, doors opened for people who never imagined having an opportunity to grow within the company. Sarah's story and the success of the Inner Voice Initiative drew attention beyond the walls of the company. She was invited to share her journey at a national congress on leadership and innovation. On stage, before an audience of hundreds of executives and professionals, she did not romanticize her story. She told the truth, the difficulties, the sacrifices, the invisibility. She said that she was never just a cleaning lady, but a capable and prepared person whose skills were ignored for years because of a label. She asked the audience to look around in their own companies, in their own lives, and ask themselves what they were missing by never seeing beyond positions, titles, appearances. The audience, visibly moved, rose in applause. It was a recognition not just of her story, but of the universal truth she represented. Talent is everywhere, often hidden in the least expected places. The symbolic consecration came when Sarah Johnson's name was engraved on a bronze plaque and affixed to the door of the company's main training room, renamed Inner Voice Sarah Johnson Room. There was no party, no grand speech, just a plaque, a simple but powerful gesture. The symbol that something fundamental had changed in that company. A person's value was no longer measured only by their position or degree, but by their capacity, their contribution, and their humanity. And yet, at the height of her recognition, came the most virulent attacks. Dr. Helen Crawford, who had observed Sarah's rise with growing resentment, decided it was time to act more directly. In a board meeting, she demanded explanations from Dr. Williams about the risky bet he had made, openly questioning Sarah's qualification and profile for a leadership position. Dr. Williams defended Sarah firmly, presenting the concrete results she had achieved and the success of the Inner Voice Initiative. But Dr. Helen wouldn't give in. She insinuated that there was something more, something inappropriate in the way Sarah had been promoted, something that didn't fit the company's governance standards. Sarah, who was present at the meeting, heard the insinuations calmly, although her heart was racing. When it was her turn to speak, she looked at Dr. Helen and the board members. "My whole life has been a bet, Dr. Crawford, a bet against circumstances, against the lack of opportunities, against the labels that society insists on imposing on us. I didn't ask to be here. Dr. Williams gave me a chance based on what I could do, not on what I appeared to be, and the results speak for themselves." She paused, her voice clear and firm. "I don't have your traditional background. I don't come from influential families. I didn't study at the elite universities you attended. I come from struggle, from hard work, from necessity, and maybe that's exactly why I can see things you don't see, connect with people you don't reach. If that's a risk, then maybe it's a risk worth taking." And with that, she stood up and left the room with her head held high, leaving an astonished silence behind. The next day, Sarah arrived early, as always. The confrontation with Dr. Helen had shaken her, but also strengthened her. She knew that resistance wouldn't easily disappear. There were powerful forces that felt threatened by her presence, by the change she represented. She immersed herself in work. She made calls in various languages, resolving pending issues and strengthening relationships with international partners. She guided teams that were working on new multicultural projects. She attended to clients who sought her out directly, confident in her ability to understand their needs. While working, she noticed a small folded note outside her office. Curious, she opened it. Inside, just 3 words, handwritten, "We see you." She looked around, but there was no one nearby. 3 simple words, but they carried an enormous weight. It was a message of support, of recognition. perhaps of solidarity from someone who also felt invisible, or perhaps it was a warning. She didn't know, but she kept the note, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. In the weeks that followed, Sarah became an even greater reference within the company. People sought her out not only for her talent, with languages or her ability to solve complex problems, but for her attentive listening, her wisdom, and her genuine way of caring. She became an informal mentor for many, especially for the participants of the Inner Voice initiative. She told a curious intern who asked how she managed to learn so many things. "I learned one word at a time, with patience, with dedication, without giving up, the same way you'll learn everything you need to get where you want to go. There's no shortcut to knowledge or success, it's one step at a time." Dr. Williams, observing all of this, felt he had made the right decision. The company was changing for the better, and Sarah was the catalyst for that change. He knew that the resistance from people like Dr. Helen was real, but he was determined to protect Sarah and the Inner Voice initiative. What he didn't know was that Dr. Helen's opposition wasn't just personal or professional. It was linked to something much bigger, something that involved old secrets and powerful interests that could shake the very foundations of the company itself. And Sarah, with her honesty and her search for transparency, was becoming unknowingly a direct threat to these secrets, placing herself on a dangerous path that would lead her to confront truths that had been hidden in the shadows for too long. And that could change not only her future, but the fate of everyone in the corporation. The plot was thickening, and Sarah, the ex-cleaning lady, was about to discover that the corporate world could be much more dangerous than the silent early mornings of the lobby. The frantic rhythm of the lobby now seemed distant to Sarah. Her days were filled with virtual meetings that crossed time zones, delicate negotiations that required not just fluency, but a deep understanding of cultural subtleties and the growing management of the Inner Voice initiative. The room that was once just a workspace, with a view of the city she cleaned in the early morning hours, became a center of activity, a meeting point for ideas and talents. The Inner Voice initiative, under Sarah's enthusiastic coordination, was exceeding all expectations. The first training classes, focused on digital skills and interpersonal communication, were completing their modules, and the results were visible. Employees who previously felt stagnated showed new motivation and confidence. The mentorship program, which connected emerging talents with experienced leaders from different departments, created bridges and broke down silos. Sarah dedicated a significant part of her time to this project, as she saw in it the materialization of her own journey, the proof that potential was everywhere, waiting only for an opportunity to be seen. Of course, the success of Inner Voice and Sarah's meteoric rise didn't come without resistance. Dr. Helen Crawford continued to be a persistent shadow, weaving acidic comments in meetings, questioning the sustainability of the program and the lack of rigor in the selection criteria. She tried to create bureaucratic obstacles, delaying the release of resources, or questioning the validity of Sarah's proposals. It was a cold war, fought with forced smiles and carefully chosen words. Sarah felt the pressure, but didn't let it shake her. She focused on the results, on the success stories of the Inner Voice participants, on the confidence that Dr. Williams placed in her. She knew her position was vulnerable, that at any slip, Dr. Helen and her allies would be ready to attack. But the feeling of doing the right thing, of opening doors for others, was a powerful fuel. Amid her many responsibilities, Sarah began to delve into some of the company's oldest international contracts. Dr. Williams had suggested that she review past agreements, identifying possible areas for improvement or lessons learned. It was an arduous task, involving documents in various languages, some dating back years. It was during this review that she began to notice something strange. There was a particular contract regarding a long-term partnership with a logistics company in Eastern Europe. The agreement was complex, involving several payment stages and intricate clauses about the movement of goods. Sarah, with her eye trained for linguistic and cultural nuances, noticed that some clauses seemed intentionally ambiguous, written in a way that allowed different interpretations. More worrying still, the dates of certain payments and deliveries didn't match the company's internal records that she could access. There seemed to be a discrepancy between what was on paper and what actually happened. She spent hours poring over the documents, comparing versions in different languages, cross-referencing with old financial reports. The more she investigated, the more the feeling that something was wrong grew. It wasn't a simple translation, error, or a communication failure. It seemed deliberate. There were gaps in the records, and some internal communications related to this contract seemed to have been erased or archived in an inaccessible way. Sarah tried to get more information through official channels, but encountered resistance. The finance department claimed that the records were old and difficult to trace. The legal department said that the contract had already been terminated and didn't justify an in-depth investigation. The resistance was subtle but clear. Someone didn't want her looking closely at that contract. Sarah's intuition, sharpened by years of observation in the shadows, screamed that there was something important there, something that was hidden. She remembered the anonymous note, "We see you." Was this investigation the reason why someone saw her? Was this the secret behind Dr. Helen's resistance? Dr. Helen, in turn, seemed to intensify her attacks. In a team meeting, she made a sarcastic comment about Sarah's limited experience in real business, insinuating that she was wasting time with social projects instead of focusing on the company's strategic priorities. Sarah responded calmly, presenting data on the increase in employee morale and the identification of new talents that could generate savings and innovation in the long run. But Helen's barb made it clear that she was watching Sarah's every step, waiting for the right moment to undermine her credibility. The pressure was mounting. Sarah felt increasingly isolated in her investigation of the old contract. She couldn't share her suspicions with just anyone, as she didn't know who to trust. Dr. Williams supported her, but he was busy with his own responsibilities and might not understand the depth of what she was discovering. What if the irregularities were more serious than they seemed? What if they involved high-level people within the company? One night, working late in her office, Sarah found an old file box that had been forgotten in a storage room. It was labeled with the name of the project related to the European contract. Inside, there were copies of emails, handwritten notes, and document drafts that weren't in the digital archives. As she flipped through the yellowed papers, she found something that made her stop. A handwritten note, apparently from an internal meeting, mentioned an adjustment in the contract values, justified by unforeseen additional costs. The date of the note was prior to the final contract signing. Next to it, a quick calculation indicated a significant amount that seemed to have been diverted to an offshore account. There were no names on the note, only initials, but the initials looked familiar. Sarah felt a chill. This wasn't just an error or a discrepancy. It seemed to be the tip of an iceberg, a scheme that involved the diversion of funds, hidden under the complexity of an international contract. And the initials. She needed to be sure. But how? And what would she do if her suspicions were confirmed? She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, that unraveling this secret could have consequences that went far beyond her career. But the idea of ignoring what she had found, of allowing something like this to continue, was unbearable. She had fought so hard to have her voice heard, to bring transparency and value to the company. She couldn't simply turn a blind eye to something that seemed so wrong. The night advanced, and Sarah knew that from that moment, her journey at the company would take an unexpected and dangerous turn, and that the search for truth would lead her to confront powerful forces that wouldn't hesitate to protect it at any cost. The file box seemed to weigh a ton in Sarah's hands. The yellowed papers, the handwritten notes, the dates that didn't match, everything combined to form a disturbing picture. The office air conditioning seemed to have stopped working, the heat rising from her chest and blurring her vision. This wasn't just an accounting discrepancy. It was evidence of something much larger, something that smelled of fraud and corruption. And the initials on the handwritten note. She looked at them again. HC. HC. Who in the company had those initials? Her mind began to go through the list of executives, directors, managers. There were some names that came to mind, but one in particular stood out. Someone who had been watching her with hostility since her first day in her new position. Dr. Helen Crawford. The coincidence was disturbing. Was it possible that the director of international relations, the woman who questioned her ability at every opportunity, was involved in a scheme to divert funds? Sarah felt a chill. If her suspicions were correct, she wasn't just dealing with a jealous colleague, but with someone who had a secret to protect, a secret that could justify the fierce resistance she faced. But the initials alone were not proof. It could be someone else. It could be a cruel coincidence. She spent the rest of the night in the office, reviewing documents, trying to find more connections, more clues. The contract with the logistics company from Eastern Europe, Project Aurora, as it was called, in the archives, seemed to be the epicenter of the irregularities. There were references to additional payments, to unspecified consultancies, to inflated operational costs, all hidden under the complexity of international transactions and the language barrier. The light of dawn began to invade the room when Sarah finally put the documents back in the box. She knew she couldn't leave them there, and she couldn't take them home as she didn't want to put Sophie at risk in case someone was monitoring her movements. She decided to hide them in a safe place within the company itself, a place that only she knew, a refuge from the cleaning early mornings. In the following days, Sarah maintained an external routine of normality. She participated in meetings, managed inner voice, interacted with colleagues, but inside, her mind worked feverishly. She observed Dr. Helen with a new perspective, trying to detect any sign, any behavior that could confirm her suspicions. Helen continued to be the same, cold, calculating, always ready to launch a veiled criticism or a look of contempt. But now, Sarah saw something more in her eyes, a subtle tension, a constant vigilance. Sarah decided she needed more information before confronting anyone or taking the matter to Dr. Williams. She knew that an unfounded accusation could destroy her career and undermine the credibility of Inner Voice. She needed concrete evidence. She began to use her knowledge of languages and her informal network of contacts within the company. She talked to employees from different departments, asking seemingly innocent questions about the company's history, about old projects, about the people who had worked there for a longer time. She discovered that Project Aurora had been one of the largest and most complex international contracts of the company at the time of its negotiation, about 10 years ago. It involved several trips abroad, high-level meetings, and great pressure to be closed. An old employee from the finance department, already retired, with whom Sarah maintained contact since the times when she cleaned his office, mentioned in passing that there had been some problems with that contract, some things that were not clear, but that everything had been resolved and archived. He didn't go into details, but the hesitation in his voice and the way he looked away confirmed Sarah's suspicions. There was something to be hidden. Meanwhile, the pressure on Sarah increased in other ways. The budget for the Inner Voice initiative began to be questioned. Requests for materials and resources were delayed. Rumors began to circulate in the corridors that the program was too expensive, that it wasn't generating concrete results, that it was just a pet project of Dr. Williams and Sarah. She knew that these rumors were orchestrated, an attempt to undermine her work and discredit her. Dr. Helen was no longer limited to insinuations. In a planning meeting, she openly suggested that the resources for Inner Voice be reallocated to more strategic areas, such as the International Relations Department. "We need to focus on what really brings financial return to the company, Robert," she said, looking directly at Sarah. "Social projects are noble, of course, but in times of tight economy, we need to make tough choices." Dr. Williams defended the program vehemently, citing the positive results already achieved and the long-term potential. But Sarah felt the strength of the opposition. They were trying to clip her wings, isolate her. Determined to find more evidence, Sarah decided to take a risk. She knew that digital archives had been cleaned, but perhaps there was something in old backup systems or less accessible servers. Using her computer knowledge, which she had acquired studying alone in the early morning hours, she began to explore the company's internal networks at night, when most employees were at home. It was slow and dangerous work. She navigated through protected directories, bypassed basic firewalls, looking for any mention of Project Aurora or the suspicious transactions she had found in the physical documents. She found many files, most innocuous. Progress reports, meeting agendas, routine communications. But then, after hours of searching, she found something. It was an old email, sent from an internal account that seemed to have been deactivated. The sender was a name she didn't recognize, but the recipient was someone with whom Dr. Helen communicated frequently. The subject of the email was vague, but the body of the message contained a coded reference to a final adjustment in the European agreement and instructions to ensure that all traces were removed before the audit. The date of the email corresponded to the period when Project Aurora was being finalized. Sarah copied the email to an encrypted flash drive. That wasn't definitive proof of Dr. Helen's involvement, but it was another piece of the puzzle, connecting her to the suspicious period and project. The mention of removing traces and audit confirmed that there was a deliberate attempt to hide something. With each new discovery, Sarah's fear increased, but her determination also strengthened. She could no longer ignore what was happening. There was a corruption scheme within the company, and powerful people were involved, and for some reason her rise and her work on inner voice seemed to have disturbed the balance and drawn attention to this secret. One night, as she returned home after another long day of work and night investigation, Sarah noticed a dark car parked on the street, a few meters from her building. It wasn't uncommon to see cars parked there, but something about the way that car was parked, with the headlights off and dark windows, made her uneasy. She quickened her pace, feeling a chill down her spine. As she approached the door of her building, the car started and slowly passed by her, but the windows remained dark, preventing her from seeing who was inside. Sarah entered the building, her heart racing. Was it just paranoia? Or was someone really watching her? The anonymous note came to her mind. "We see you." Those words now seemed less like support and more like a warning. She ran up the stairs, entered her apartment and locked the door. Sophie was sleeping peacefully in her room. Sarah watched her for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility. Everything she did was for Sophie, to give her a better future. But now, her search for truth was putting her in danger, and by extension, putting her daughter at risk. She knew she couldn't stop. She had gone too far. She had discovered things that couldn't be ignored. But she also knew that she needed to be extremely careful. Her opponents were powerful and wouldn't hesitate to use dirty tactics to protect themselves. The investigation into Project Aurora and Dr. Helen's possible involvement had become more than a search for justice. It had become a fight for her own safety and for Sophie's safety. The next step would be crucial, and Sarah knew she needed help. But trusting someone now was an even greater risk than continuing alone. The web of secrets and intrigues was closing around her, and she needed to find a way out before it was too late for her and for everyone she was trying to help. The file box was hidden under the false floor of a maintenance closet in the basement, a place that Sarah knew intimately from her cleaning days. It was a secure hiding place, a secret between her and the silent walls of the building. But even with the documents stored, the unease remained. The coded email, the initials HC, the dark car on the street, it all added up to a growing certainty. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, and the people involved knew she was investigating. Sarah spent a sleepless night, her sleep disturbed by thoughts about Sophie, about the risks she was taking. But the alternative, ignoring what she had discovered, was unthinkable. This wasn't just about a corruption scheme. It was about the integrity of the company, about the future of people who, like her, were beginning to find their voice through the Inner Voice initiative. She couldn't allow darkness to overcome light. She decided she needed to act, but intelligently. Confronting Dr. Helen directly would be suicide. Taking the evidence to the police without first involving Dr. Williams could be seen as a betrayal of the company. Or worse, the evidence could be discredited or manipulated before the investigation could even begin. The only person she felt she could trust was Dr. Williams. He had believed in her when no one else did, had given her the chance to prove her worth. He needed to know. The next morning, Sarah requested an urgent meeting with Dr. Williams. She didn't give details, only said she needed to discuss a matter of extreme importance related to an old international contract. Dr. Williams, sensing the seriousness in her voice, immediately agreed. The meeting took place at the end of the day, after most employees had already left. Sarah entered Dr. Williams' room, carrying only a simple folder. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to speak. She told him about her review of the old contracts, about Project Aurora, about the discrepancies she had found. She presented the copies of the physical documents, the coded email, the handwritten notes with the initials HC. She explained the ambiguity of the clauses, the suspicious payments, the attempt to erase digital tracks. Dr. Williams listened in silence, his expression changing from curiosity to perplexity, and finally to contained anger. He leafed through the documents, his eyes scanning the lines, absorbing the evidence. The mention of the initials HC made him raise his head and look at Sarah. "Helen Crawford?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded. "The initials in the C handwritten note are HC, sir, and the coded email was sent to someone close to her in the period when the contract was being finalized." Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his hair. The implication was clear and devastating. One of his oldest directors, someone he trusted, or thought he trusted, was possibly involved in a corruption scheme that had lasted years. And the resistance that Sarah faced, the veiled attacks, the bureaucratic obstacles, it all made sense now. Helen wasn't just jealous or envious, she was protecting a secret. "Sarah, this is very serious," said Dr. Williams, his voice tense. "If this is true, the consequences for the company and for all of us will be enormous." "I know, sir," she replied, "but I couldn't ignore it. Not after everything you've taught me about transparency and value. I believe that the truth, however painful it may be, is always the best path." Dr. Williams looked at her, at the calm determination in her eyes. The ex-cleaning lady he had promoted wasn't just a talented translator. She was a woman of unwavering principles. He knew she was right. They couldn't sweep this under the rug. "We need to investigate this thoroughly," he said. "But we need to be very careful. If Helen is involved, she won't be alone. Schemes like this usually involve more people, and they won't want this to come to light." They spent hours discussing a plan. They decided to involve an external team of forensic auditors, someone from outside the company with an impeccable reputation and the capability to investigate complex and digital transactions. Dr. Williams would use his authority to initiate the audit, disguising it as a routine review of old contracts to identify risks and optimize processes. Sarah would continue in her position, acting normally, but would provide the initial clues and the cultural and linguistic context for the audit team. They decided to keep the investigation absolutely secret, limiting the knowledge only to the two of them and the external audit team. The days that followed were tense. Sarah felt as if she was walking on eggshells. She continued to manage inner voice, to participate in meetings, to interact with Dr. Helen, maintaining a facade of normality. But each look from Helen seemed like a threat. Each sarcastic comment seemed loaded with a hidden meaning. She knew that at any moment, at any slip, everything could fall apart. The external audit team arrived discreetly, presenting themselves as process optimization consultants. Sarah met with them in neutral locations outside the office, providing them with copies of the documents, the encrypted flash drive, and explaining what she had discovered. The auditors, experienced professionals in unraveling corporate fraud, quickly realized the seriousness of Sarah's allegations. They began to dive into financial records, digital archives, internal communications, following the trail of money and information that Sarah had identified. The investigation took several weeks. While the auditors worked behind the scenes, the tension in the company increased. Dr. Helen seemed increasingly nervous, her attacks on Sarah and inner voice becoming more frequent and aggressive. She tried, unsuccessfully, to gain access to the audit team's reports, questioning their presence and the scope of their work. Her uneasiness was a clear sign to Sarah and Dr. Williams that they were on the right track. The climax came at an extraordinary board meeting, convened by Dr. Williams to present the results of the external audit. The room was full of board members, high-ranking executives, and Dr. Helen Crawford, sitting at the table with a tense but controlled expression. Sarah was present at Dr. Williams' invitation, sitting discreetly beside him. The head of the external audit team began to present his findings. With graphs and documents projected on the screen, he detailed the fund diversion scheme related to Project Aurora. He explained how ambiguous clauses were used to justify inflated payments, how shell companies were created to launder money, and how records were altered or erased to cover up the fraud. The total amount diverted was astronomical, equivalent to millions of dollars over several years. As the presentation progressed, Dr. Helen's expression changed from tension to panic. The evidence was irrefutable. The auditor showed emails, bank statements from offshore accounts, and finally, the handwritten notes with the initials HC, connecting her directly to the scheme. When the auditor finished, there was a stunned silence in the room. Dr. Williams looked at Dr. Helen, his voice cold and firm. "Helen, do you have anything to say?" Dr. Helen stood up, her face pale but still trying to maintain composure. "This is absurd, a setup. This evidence is false, I'm innocent." She looked at Sarah, her eyes full of hatred. "This is her work. She invented all of this to bring me down. She has no qualifications, no experience. She's just a cleaning lady who got lucky." Sarah, who had remained silent until then, calmly stood up. Her voice, though soft, echoed in the room. "I didn't invent anything, Dr. Crawford. I just looked at the facts. Facts that were hidden, that you and others tried to erase. I didn't do this to bring anyone down. I did this because it's the right thing to do, because truth matters, and because the integrity of this company matters." She looked at the board members. "I may not have your degrees or your background, but I learned to see what's hidden in the shadows. I learned to value what is invisible, and what I saw here was corruption corroding the trust and transparency that this company should represent." Dr. Helen's denial and Sarah's calm dignity contrasted strongly. The board members, shocked by the findings, gave no credit to Helen's desperate accusations. The evidence was overwhelming. The consequences were swift and decisive. Dr. Helen Crawford was immediately removed from her position, and a legal investigation was initiated. Other employees involved in the scheme were also identified and dismissed. The scandal shook the company, but Dr. Williams's quick and transparent response, based on Sarah's findings, helped mitigate damage to its reputation. In the aftermath of the scandal, Sarah's position in the company was not only validated, but strengthened. She was no longer seen just as a cultural advisor or the coordinator of Inner Voice. She was the person who had discovered and exposed corruption, the guardian of the company's integrity. The Inner Voice initiative, which was previously viewed with skepticism by some, became a symbol of transparency, of valuing all employees, and of the importance of listening to voices that were previously silenced. The anonymous note, "We see you," now made sense. Someone, perhaps within the company itself, knew about the scheme and saw in Sarah the person with the courage and ability to expose it. Dr. Williams, grateful and impressed, offered Sarah an even greater leadership position, with responsibilities that went beyond international relations, focusing on organizational culture and corporate integrity. She accepted, but with one condition. The Inner Voice initiative should receive even more resources and support, becoming a strategic pillar of the company. Dr. Williams agreed without hesitation. Sarah Johnson, the woman who started by cleaning marble floors, now walked on them as a respected leader, a powerful voice in a transformed company. Her journey wasn't about luck, but about resilience, dedication, and the courage to use her skills and her voice, even when circumstances pushed her toward invisibility. She proved that talent has no social class, that integrity has no price, and that the most important voices are often those we learn to hear in the shadows. And thus, Sarah's story became the company's story, a story of overcoming, transparency, and the discovery that the greatest value lies in people, in all of them, visible or invisible, each with their own voice, waiting only for the chance to be heard. The lobby still teemed with executives, but now among them there was a new awareness, a new respect, and the certainty that the true strength of that corporation came from all its corners, even the most unexpected ones. Her daughter Sophie would grow up in a world where hard work and honesty were valued,